Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, has been meeting people in hospital who were injured in the terror attacks at mosques in Christchurch on Friday. Brenton Tarrant, an Australian national who's 28, has appeared in court charged with 1 count of murder, though further charges are expected to follow. These are live pictures from Christchurch. As you can see, people have been laying flowers near the mosques with messages of support for the victims and their families. My colleague Sharonjeet Lail is in Christchurch for us.
That's right, Celia. I'm just here at the law courts where earlier today Brenton Tarrant appeared on the dock in white. And of course, he's going to be held until April the 5th when he will be appearing again. He's been charged on 1 sentence, 1 count so far. But of course, many others are to come because we know 49 people have been confirmed to have been killed at those mosque attacks just yesterday. And many others are injured in the hospital in intensive care as well. Now, of course, there's been a great sense of solidarity amongst people here in Christchurch. I've been speaking to a lot of them. There's a sense of resilience that they will bounce back from this. But of course, many people still remain in shock. And I went to visit a memorial in the centre of town just a little earlier. A memorial for the victims of the shooting. Christchurch residents have been bringing flowers and leaving notes here all day. The messages are clear. New Zealand may be struggling to comprehend the tragic events that took place in Christchurch, but people were determined to come together to pay their respects.
Yeah, my friend have a shortened leg actually. Yeah, I tried to ring him yesterday, but I couldn't get to him.
Memorials like this one have been springing up all over the city. People have been coming here to the botanical gardens in Christchurch all day, leaving their messages and flowers. There's a real sense of shock and horror at how something so awful could strike the heart of this community.
We're very laid back. I think we're too laid back.
Yeah.
And the world has got a bit small now.
Yeah.
And we need to kind of secure things for our ones that are precious to us, like these lives that have been lost. It's all in vain, really.
New Zealand's Prime Minister has praised the efforts police have made, but has called for a review of the country's gun laws after it was revealed that the suspect legally obtained his weapon. She has also met with community leaders.
New Zealand is united in its grief, and we are united in our grief. And so I convey that message of love and support on behalf of New Zealand.
An Australian man has appeared in court. 28-year-old Brenton Tarrant wasn't on any security watch list. He didn't enter a plea and is due to appear in court next on April the 5th. It's understood that nationals of Bangladesh, India and Indonesia are among the dead. Christchurch has seen tragedy like this before and is still rebuilding from a devastating earthquake just 8 years ago. But nothing quite like this. Then, as now, the rallying cry in many messages of support is a Maori phrase that means stay strong. So that was the sense of resilience I was speaking about earlier, people feeling that they can move on from this, but still many in shock. I'm now joined by Kim Baker-Wilson, who's a reporter from TVNZ, and he's been reporting on this since the story broke just yesterday. And Kim, you were here at the law courts earlier when the suspect was brought.
A very packed scene. Normally the New Zealand public can get into New Zealand courts as a right to go and see people appear, but that wasn't the case today. So high was the risk of security going wrong that the court stopped the public from going in here today. Media, accredited media, were the only ones allowed inside, brought through 6 at a time. When they got through there, Mr Tarrant appeared in a white boiler suit and bare feet, handcuffed. He appeared to be rocking slightly side to side, only appeared for minutes without a lawyer. And as you were mentioning earlier, he has been remanded in custody without plea after appear in the High Court next month.
That's right. And we've heard from the Prime Minister several times since this awful tragedy occurred yesterday. Earlier, she was visiting victims in the hospital, speaking to bereaved families as well as members from the Muslim community. What's she been saying?
She came here straight from the capital, Wellington, on an Air Force flight and came with the Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy Prime Minister also. And she gave them condolences, her condolences, both from herself and from the country. They talked earlier about how people came here to live recently and also so many years ago in many cases, and Christchurch has been welcoming them with open arms, and Christchurch is where so many of them have been injured or lost their lives. So she gave her condolences to the survivors and to the families of those who have lost people, and also gave them assurances that ACC, the Accident Compensation Corporation here in New Zealand, will support people, will support families if the victims have been working here in New Zealand.
Wow. And also, you know, you've come from Auckland to cover this here in Christchurch, and there's a real sense of New Zealand having been very much shaken up by this tragedy. What's the sense, the mood that you feel?
We certainly have been. When we arrived at the airport, there were armed police officers at the airport, which is a sight you just don't see in New Zealand. Behind the camera behind us here now, I can see an armed police officer walking outside the police building, which again is a sight you just don't see in New Zealand. So we're now using words that we've never had to use here before, like terrorism, like massacre. Those are words that we've just never had to use throughout New Zealand news before.
All right, well, Kim Baker-Wilson, thank you so much for joining us and telling us your experience of this. Now, of course, a lot of people still really shaken by this, as you heard Kim say. Security as well, very much on alert a day after the fact. Earlier, I was speaking to Christchurch City Councillor Raf Mungi, and this is what he had to say.
It's been 24 hours now, and there's a sense of still being stunned that this has happened here in our city, and just trying to get to some sense of what the community needs, what's happening in terms of burials and the proper processes that are needed for the community for that, supporting our medical staff who are still doing an incredible job, and I think just the general community coming to terms with it. I mean, I've just walked past the Botanic Gardens where there's a floral display, and people are very quiet. It's as if people are still in shock over what has happened, and I think as the initial incident wears off, it's going to take a while for people to actually come to terms that this has happened here in Christchurch, in New Zealand.
Right. And in terms of readiness, you said you've been working with your colleagues, and certainly the hospital staff have been inundated as well. There's a real concern, obviously, that with so many people dead, and in Muslim tradition, they have to be buried in 24 hours. Is there a sense that facilities in Christchurch can deal with this?
That is very challenging for us. I've been told it will probably take 4 days to actually dig the appropriate number of graves. So, yeah, that's going to be a problem. So we're going to have to work with the community and find a way through that. And obviously there's a coronial process that needs to be gone through as well. So how that pans out, we don't know. Hopefully tomorrow morning we'll have some more answers, and we'll just have to see how that plays out.
And do you feel like you've got enough resources? Are more being sent?
We're pulling in resources from around the country. I mean, the one advantage we've had in a way is having been through the earthquakes. We've been through this. I mean, the medical staff have been through this before. They operate at a very high level. But still, there's resource shortages. So in terms of sextons for the burial services, they need to be brought in. So yeah, we'll be asking for help where we need it.
Indeed, and as you mentioned, it's not the first time Christchurch has faced tragedy. It's had to deal with these awful earthquakes in the past, the last being in 2012, which was devastating for this community. So in comparison, how do you think the community is dealing with this now compared to what's happened prior to this? Is this the same sort of feeling, or is there a sense that actually there's a lot of discomfort and concern around this issue?
I think probably a mixture. I think there's a weariness. I mean, in terms of the earthquake recovery, we had just got to the point where we just reopened our town hall 8 years after the earthquake, a new central city library. Felt like things were getting back to normal. And then for this to happen and for children to be in lockdown at school, so that whole sort of trauma again, parents stuck in their offices or civic buildings, it's kind of reliving that. So the mental health issue, which has already had a long tail from the earthquakes, is of concern. But I think this is not a natural disaster. This is a man-made disaster, a domestic terror attack in our own town. So it's going to be quite difficult for people to actually come to terms with that. And I think as we start to see and learn more names and put faces to those and to bury people, I think it will have a bigger impact on the wider community.
Now, Raf, you were saying that you're part Muslim yourself, and you've lived here in Christchurch for many, many years. So is there a sense that your community is feeling incredibly, uncomfortable, unsafe because of this?
I think now there's probably some concerns, but actually my sense is that the Islamic community still has faith in New Zealand being a safe place. But we have to address some of the issues around radicalisation and what has led to this attack. But generally the communities have felt safe, even as a general increasing tone of Islamophobia globally. I mean, and that has spilled over into New Zealand, there's no doubt about that. But in general, people didn't have a lot of concerns. You'd go to Friday prayers, no one really thought too much about it.
And that was Christchurch City Councillor Raf Manji speaking to me earlier. Now, of course, as you can imagine, it's the day after the fact. Many residents here in Christchurch still very much coming to terms with this. But as you heard there, and as you heard in the report earlier as well, there's a real sense of resilience that people are now able to get through this. You know, it is a city that has endured tragedies like the devastating earthquake about 8 years ago as well. So they're rebuilding. They know they can get past this, but at the moment there's a real sense of, you know, how could this happen in our homes? How could it happen in our community? How could it happen in New Zealand, where such things are just unheard of?
Okay, Sharonjit Lale, thank you very much.